welcome to everybody in LCMS urban and intercity mission land out there. It's good to have you with us. Make sure you tell your friends about this webinar series. It will be available on our YouTube page after we're finished for people that couldn't join us, but hopefully they can join us next time. Our next topic for June will be understanding social issues in the urban setting, and that will be with Reverend Larry Vogel. So we're excited about hearing about ministry to those and social issues that affect us in the urban setting. Today we're super excited. We're going to be talking about community development, work that we can do in our inner cities to make a difference and to allow us to have mercy that's connected to our Word and Sacrament ministries. So we've got a couple of superstars, subject matter experts in the field, also very good partners of ours, both with Lutheran Housing Support. So we want to make sure we welcome Nicole Ridley, who's the Chief Executive for the LCMS National Housing Support. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And then also we have Mr. Fred Kimbrough, and Fred serves as the Director of Projects and Lending. So Fred, Director of Projects and Lending, I think that would be the title that I have at home as well. So.
Is that what you do, Pastor?
There's always a project and there's always money to lend. So.
I agree with you. I like that one. I
like those.
I fit that description as well at home.
Fair enough. So welcome again to everybody. Thanks for joining us. And again, we're very excited to find out more about how we can be involved with community development and to make a difference in our cities. So you guys ready to take it from here?
Yes.
All right, here we go.
Well, I just want to say, first of all, good afternoon, everyone. We are excited to be doing our introduction to community development presentation today. And so we're going to kind of start out and ease into it a little bit. And then we'll try to finish with a bang. I know that Pastor Steve said we only have 45 minutes of camera time. I was a little upset about that. So with that said, I am going to move into community development and an official definition. And as the screen says, at its heart, community development is rooted in the belief that all people should have access to health, well-being, wealth, justice, and opportunity. And in essence, that means their communities should be nice like other places, although we know in a lot of the inner cities that is not the case that we encounter. And I have a definition if we move down to the next screen. And I say community development is a strategic process in which organizations seek to improve communities through housing, infrastructure, economic development, and education. And so those are the areas, for example, we work pretty much in all those areas at Lutheran Housing Support, with the exception of education. We do financial literacy and things like that. But with respect to the housing, that's one of the major focuses of community development throughout the country. We have the types of activities, community financing. That often happens through banks, through CRA lending. Also, there are community lenders that have established themselves throughout the United States as well. Business development, where you have the micro lending. There are a lot of organizations throughout the country that do micro lending. They receive money through the Treasury Department to do this type of activity. But there's also major banks that also engage in this because of the Community Reinvestment Act. And then you have community building and community organizing organizations. Those are a lot of your neighborhood organizations. Those are organizations that are, I would call them CDCs to a certain extent as well, that work in neighborhoods to work towards revitalizing them as well. Next slide.
CDC, you have to forgive us. A lot of times we'll use our acronyms just because we're accustomed to doing so. Yes. But the CDC is a Community Development Corporation, and yes, that is how an agency can organize itself and deliver services in a geographic area.
Mm-hmm. And as far as, like she said, a geographic area, neighborhood, that could be around your churches. So the history of community development, a very brief history. In the 60s, I think things were known as urban renewal, and then they moved towards community development as the actual way that people define community work with respect to revitalizing the neighborhoods. In 1974, the Housing and Community Development Act was enacted, and what that brought into play was the largest community building program from a government side all time. It's called the Community Development Block Grant Program, and that is a program that is funded through the federal government. And what it allows communities to do is work in those areas, your low to moderate income areas, and do various types of activities from housing to doing sewers, sidewalks, also doing things like working with community centers, job training, just a whole plethora of things that funding has been able to do through the years. In 1978, you had neighborhood reinvestment that's now known as NeighborWorks. That is a large network of community development organizations that fly under the NeighborWorks banner. And then in the 80s, this is something when I got into community development that was coming online, low-income housing tax credits, where state housing agencies award credits to developers and development entities, and that allows them to go out on the market and seek capital to actually do housing development and other types of projects as well. And then we had CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions. That is ran through the Treasury Department. That is a program that allows small community lenders to have access to capital and to leverage capital to help lend to community and economic development activities in low to moderate income neighborhoods. And then of course in the 2000s, everything flew off the tracks. We lost a lot of economic power during the downturn. And of course, when priorities take place, the things that are essential in the community oftentimes get cut out. And so we lost a lot of funding. It did come back though a little bit. And I think Nicole will cover.
In the overview of LCMS Housing Ministry, the LCMS has actually been involved in housing for many years, centuries. And so the LCMS has a proud heritage and actually was established, was providing housing back in the 1800s. And the first development was a shelter for orphans for the homeless in St. Louis, Missouri. And in 1960s, 3 resolutions the church established that created the Keys for Christ program. Some of you guys might be familiar with that. But that program actually was created, it was a church-wide campaign to secure dollars that would help various agencies provide affordable housing opportunities across the United States. And in the 1980s, there was the Brooklyn Nehemiah Project, which came online, which developed over 3,000 units. And that was at a time when Brooklyn had experienced a lot of disinvestment. There was a lot of burns, and really it was a community plagued with devastation. And our church was instrumental in providing the first $1 million to invest in that community. And that investment leveraged several dollars. Our church body, rather, was the first to invest $1 million. But that has since quadrupled, and there's almost 6,000 units now. So our church was very instrumental in leveraging not only investment, but was actually leading the forefront through Dr. Binky, Pastor Binky's efforts. And in 2007, our church body created Lutheran Housing Support, which our legal name is LCMS National Housing Support Corporation. We do business as Lutheran Housing Support. And since we began operations, we've raised more than $11.5 million in services to support community development activities across the country. So we work with congregations, districts, and social ministries to bring that expertise to help you really carry out any community improvement activities that you have in mind to transform your communities or just make a difference. And our mission is to provide access to capital and customized consulting services for underserved neighborhoods, and really in order to transform them into thriving communities. And that's what we were created to do, really to be a resource to our congregations and provide a tool to not only care for them, but to wrap our arms around those communities and care for both the body and the soul. Why is this important? Why is this community development work important as a church? A lot of our congregations are located in urban areas still that have experienced a lot of disinvestment, and they still are there. And so we have what shall I say? We have a call to duty as Christians to love our neighbors. And we basically are corporate citizens of these communities. And so we are called to love our neighbors. And this is one way to do so. And we do it so well as a church body, but this is just an innovative way to care for body and soul in the communities that we are a part of. Why is community development important to the church and other LCMS partners? As you see, there are a few bullet points there, but existing owners will not invest in the community because they can't. They don't have the resources to do so most oftentimes, but we are recognized a lot of times by the work that we just do, just because that's what we do. We do pantries well. We do clothing banks well. And so we can provide and bring other resources to communities. When all the communities and institutions are destroyed, they're replaced by chaos. And so chaos is a lot of times around where we are serving and where our congregations are cornerstone, our service cornerstones in those communities. So if you haven't read Pastor Harrison's Confessional Lutheran Involvement in Neighborhood Renewal, I think that it provides a broader context as to why it's important for us to be part of our communities and serve them. And I encourage you to read it. It's a good read. Things to consider when starting a community development ministry. Really, if you're thinking about this, or if that's on your to-do list, I think one of the first things to do is to assess your congregational or organizational's readiness. Identify internal and external leaders for the project. That's always important. You need partners not only externally, but internally. Perform an analysis of community needs and assets. And then to determine what kind of support will be provided to the families in need. And we'll talk about how you do that a little later. Establish a project planning committee. I think that it's very important to get consensus within the building before you try to serve the individuals outside of the building. Determine what linkages may exist with other groups in the community. What you want to do is operate within your own strength and not create duplication of services. So as you're looking at ways that you can serve your community, take those things into consideration. Also determine what role your congregation or organization has the capacity to play in that project. And I think that's very, very important to recognize your own strengths and gifts. And once the project is selected, determine how it will be financed. And I know that a lot of that seems overwhelming and daunting, just to talk about it in general right here. But that's the kind of expertise that we bring as an organization. We kind of walk you through that process and kind of like help you identify and flesh out those details. Community development partners.
So I'll jump back in and give Nicole a rest. So with respect to community development partners, there are quite a few avenues I particularly like the ones that don't cost a lot of money up front. So what we have found through our experiences through the years is that colleges and universities are some very good sources of free or very inexpensive labor when you're trying to pull off a project. Oftentimes, the universities have institutes that are dedicated to community development. And then a lot of times as well, you have classes that will maybe take on something in your neighborhood as a class project or individual student projects. So, as well as volunteering for your particular cause or your organization if you're able to start one. And then, of course, the government and county agencies, or we could also say city or county agencies, with the various types of funding that I'll get into on the next page. But there are a lot of resources dedicated towards working, in particular, in your neighborhoods, around your churches, and just basically trying to give you a leg up. And also those folks, speaking from my own personal experience, they get engaged into your community as well when you are assigned to a certain city or you're assigned to a certain neighborhood. They start taking on a personal affinity a lot of times. And that's always good to have someone who can help you maneuver. Now, unless you get a standard bureaucrat that doesn't view that as their job, which I never did, but that's normally you can find an ally when you're talking to somebody at the city. Social service agencies, of course, that's what they like to do. They love to help people, the folks who are need the most. And RSOs, now that's a recognized service organization, which is recognized by LCMS. And those organizations have been determined to be of such great service into the communities. And what that allows them to do is access the resources of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And I tell you where this is very important. If you're trying to get something off the ground and maybe you're going to need a loan, well, then that organization is also able to access the Lutheran Church Extension Fund, LCEF. So that's a real big help if an organization can become an RSO.
And can I just interject
Yes.
for a second and just give you an example of these collaborative opportunities? In Fort Wayne, Indiana right now, we're working with St. Paul Lutheran Church, who they decided through walking through the process of identifying community needs that they would want to provide owner-occupied rehab services to residents, low-income residents around their footprint. And of course, the pastor doesn't have the capacity, or the church secretary doesn't have the capacity to do the intake and the initial assessment, but they're partnered with Lutheran Social Services of Indiana. And they are actually providing the intake services on behalf of the congregation. And so that's a wonderful partnership. And not only are they providing the intake services, but they also can provide a full-fledged assessment and partner the families with other services if they have other needs that the LSSI provides in general. So it makes for a beautiful, beautiful partnership. This one gentleman that just applied the other day, I just got an email, and he didn't have a job, and Lutheran Social Services has a workforce development program, and they actually convinced the gentleman to enroll in this program. So those are the kinds of partnerships that are really, really invaluable, and that you really do have access to without even thinking about it. Just have to capitalize on them. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. And often when you're looking at community development partners, a lot of times the main thing that people like to focus in on is housing when you're talking about community development. But all these agencies and types of organizations that we have listed on this particular slide, they provide those wraparound services a lot of times that's also needed to help a family transition out of a tough situation. So yes, we can get them into a house, but then what? maybe they're going to need some job training. So then you have the workforce development agencies. Maybe there's someone in the family that's an entrepreneur, and maybe they're a beautician and they need some help starting their own beauty shop. So then you have the micro enterprise programs. And then for a larger project, or maybe somebody wants to do a strip development center, you have the community development financial institutions, the CDFIs, that can facilitate those types of projects. So it all kind of works together to create a more vibrant community. And some of the things, the structures that you can utilize to access the money. This is the big one that everybody always hears about, the 501c3, where your organization is determined by the IRS to be tax exempt. So therefore, why is that important? Not just because, you don't have to pay any taxes, that's good too, but because people can make donations to you and receive a tax write-off. Now, some of that's changing a little bit under some of the new tax laws, at least for the next few years. We'll see what iteration happens in another year or two, but when the law expires. But right now, but in general, if you can find some folks who are blessed enough to be able to contribute to your organization, that goes a long way, because you're going to need all the sources of income you can find.
And the other, can I just interject for a second? And the other advantage, actually, to creating a separate 501c3, if the congregation that's interested in engaging in this work, is it separates the liability from the actual church itself. So creating a separate structure, infrastructure, is always encouraged if this is something you want to do ongoing, so that you can separate the liability and not encumber the organization if there's something that, Lord forbid, goes awry.
That's right. Yeah, it protects the church from that liability. It surely does. And then you have things called community housing development organizations. That is a type of organization that came out of the Home Investment Partnerships program, which I think is mentioned later on. It gives you a favorable status once you receive the certification to receive a designated pool of money from the HOME program. That's a program that many cities and counties operate through the federal government. You also have community development corporations, which are those, we mentioned them before, but that is an organization that is designated to work in your particular neighborhood on those issues that are important to the neighborhood. For some people, it could be working on creating jobs. For some people, it could be we need multifamily housing. For some neighborhoods, it could be we need single family for sale housing. So each CDC is going to be tailored towards the needs of the community. And then a lot of times they also do things with youth and children as well. So it's a very diverse type of organization with respect to doing community development. And then we talked about the RSO a little earlier. And then going to the types of funding that's available. I mentioned the Community Development Block Grant earlier. That has been the main go-to program for cities for decades, actually, and able to go in and do, just a diverse slew of projects, from housing to building community centers to putting in sewers. You name it, and the block grant has been a godsend for a whole lot of communities. Now, with that, and we've had this experience here at Lutheran Housing, they may give you $20,000 and treat it like $2 million sometimes. I have to be honest about that. But when it's for the good of the community, we'll just hold our nose a lot of times. And I have a funny story about it. I don't have time to tell you, but maybe I'll get a chance to explain something that happened with us when we applied for some money. We have the Home Investment Partnerships program, which is dedicated for housing development. That is another federal program that's exclusively set aside to do housing, but it's restricted to 80% and below the median income. So they're trying to target it for low to moderate income households. You have various types of tax credits that flow through the state, the federal government. You have For example, historic tax credits, which allow you to revitalize a building that is designated of having some significance. They have it at the federal level as well as the state level. And of course, there's low-income housing tax credits. One tax credit that's on here that we're utilizing for another project is new markets tax credits, where you have to combine economic development with the revitalization effort. You have Lutheran housing support. We have access to capital to assist primarily in the pre-development realm, when you're trying to get the project up and going, and the bank is still looking at you like, I'm not for sure, but if you can show us some of your plans and show us the big picture with this on paper and get some approvals, we can come back and help you. So we take a risk, so to speak, where the mainstream lenders want, and make that capital accessible. And then you have like I said, the various levels of government. We talked about the CDFIs and what they do with community lending and economic development lending. Of course, the banks. A lot of times people shy away from the banks and figure that if I can just get a grant to do it. But if you have a project and it actually cash flows, the bank may not be a bad option. The bank is going to look at it, at times a little more stricter, because they have to answer to their shareholders. But at the end of the day, they also have a mandate from the government through the Community Reinvestment Act, CRA, to actually lend into distressed communities. And that's a powerful tool. And if you can build a relationship with some of those CRA lenders at that particular institution, that can help you do a whole lot of great projects in your neighborhood.
And the other thing about banks is that they also do, through their CRA investment requirements, they do provide grants. And so there are opportunities to secure or procure grants from banks. And they also can sponsor applications to give you access to other types of funding. For instance, the Federal Home Loan Bank System, where there are grant dollars, and your application has to be sponsored by a financial institution. So banks, outside of just the regular, regular financing mechanisms, can be a huge resource and advocate for a project.
They do. And then they also, another thing that banks do, we're giving a lot of pub to banks today, I guess. They also have volunteers that will come out from the bank and do things with respect to financial literacy with your churches, as well as with the neighborhood. So that's another value, and that's free. They don't charge to do that. They often bring the materials, and a curriculum is in place already for them to teach those types of skills. So they're very useful there. And the Small Business Administration, a lot of people have heard of that. That is an agency of the federal government that targets small business lending, basically entrepreneurial lending, not so much just targeting low to mod, but just general small lending. Foundations, that's another big source of funding. You have a lot of major not-for-profit charitable foundations, and their whole job is to give away money. Now, they're very specific and strict about what they want to give money to, but if you can find some foundations that match up with your organization's and interest, then you have that is definitely an avenue that will pay big dividends as you all move forward towards your community development goals. And you have major charitable organizations, but you also have many corporations that have a charitable foundation side too. So there's standalone foundations, and then there are corporate foundations. And once again, especially the banks, as Nicole was mentioning, they have that mandate to assist and do community projects. And then, of course, you have the Lutheran Church Extension Fund, which has access to capital if you want to build a school, if you want to do some housing development, if you want to build a church, even rebuild your church. So those funds are also available to actually help you do different development in your community.
And I would say another form of funding that Lutheran Church Extension Fund provides, because it really does impact your bottom line positively, is the utilization of Laborers for Christ and their workforce. We use them a lot on owner-occupied rehab initiatives across the country, and they are able to provide low-cost labor that really does reduce the cost of the project significantly. And the beauty of that, which I really, really love, is that the laborers are there on a regular basis. They become part of the church and the congregation. But being at those homes, interacting and interfacing with those homeowners on a regular basis really gives an opportunity to open up opportunities to share the gospel. And I think that's just a beautiful place. Advantages of a faith-based community development initiative. Some things that you don't really think about that just by the nature of being a congregation or an established RSO is that you have these intrinsic things in place already that a new organization, they don't necessarily have. You have a facility, and that's big. You have a facility that's there that you're already paying for, or hopefully you may not be paying on for long, or you own. You have infrastructure in place, and when I say infrastructure, I mean you have a secretary, you have a treasurer or a business manager that's already there on a regular. You have initial funding source. You have access to individuals sitting in the pews that may be able to wrap their arms around a project and provide some seed funding for an initiative. Or you have access to the Office of National Mission and the grants that they provide that you that may be able to seed a project right away. You have instant community recognition. Like I said, a lot of times as a church, as Lutherans, we just are in the community doing great things, feeding the poor, just being good citizens, good Christians. And people recognize us for that and embrace us for that. And so you have that instant community recognition. I was in Detroit one time, and we had got an inquiry from a pastor, and he just really wanted to provide affordable rental housing to families in the neighborhood. And I said, well, let's just kind of talk about this. And I said, well, who do you know at the city? Let's see if we can secure some properties through tax foreclosures. We were talking. I said, well, who do you know? And then within, I don't know, a couple of days, we had a meeting with the president of city council, with the president of the county council. And I'm like, wow, those are relationships that take years to establish as just a regular organization, but he already had these established relationships because of the work that he generally does in that community. So don't discount that. You may not know what to ask for as it relates to community development work, but you have those relationships and we can help you develop those relationships and fold those into the work that you're interested in. And political contacts, again, a lot of times we'll go into communities, and like I said, that the pastors or the RSO executive already knows people because of the work that they're doing. And those are kinds of relationships, again, that take years to establish that our communities, our church body and communities already have access to volunteers, people in the pews, and your connections with others just by, again, being good folks, being good Christians, doing good work, just being out there loving your neighbors. You have access to volunteers that you might not even think of. And then access to non-traditional funding. Again, like Lutheran housing support. kind of non-traditional, or Lutheran Church Extension Fund, a little bit non-traditional that normal people don't have access to. I say normal people, but folks that are outside the church, they don't have access to. And again, individuals. We know individuals, and we have access to individuals, which a lot of nonprofits, that's not a source of funding that they have. They don't have access to individuals.
Right. And for example, here in St. Louis, we have a women's giving circle named Women on Mission, and they have adopted the College Hill neighborhood, where we've basically functioned as a CDC in St. Louis, and they have contributed hundreds of thousands of dollars to neighborhood initiatives that go towards improving the College Hill neighborhood. And so that's an example of what Nicole was talking about in terms of having a faith-based initiative. And then another thing, and I just left out of a meeting this morning, and I tell you who else likes to come to the church, the police department. They love to come and meet at the church and talk to the pastor and the members and the other neighborhood leaders. And so the church is just like it should be, a very warm and inviting and safe environment where people feel they can come and talk about things openly. So that's the beauty of it. I just had to throw that in, Nicole. So.
And I said earlier in one of the earlier slides that one of the initial things is assessing congregational readiness, and I'm just going to elaborate on what that looks like. So engage in one-on-one conversations with those in leadership positions, because this is an opportunity to clarify, process, and address concerns. And I think that that's very, very, very important to gain consensus amongst those inside the church. Identify potential participants who take part in the work that you're doing. Inside, I'm talking about inside the church. Align gifts and interests with ministries. There are lots of people that are inside the church who, they may have interest in food pantry, but they may not. And they're just sitting around waiting for something else that they can wrap their arms around. And like, for instance, this owner-occupied initiative, we have lots of congregants that come out and work alongside of the laborers for work days. They love that, but they may not have been interested in the food pantry. Or part of that initiative also is inclusive of working with the residents to help them manage their resources better. So there's a money management component, and a lot of individuals who may not be handy, may not be interested in the food pantry, but may want to provide some extra financial education. I wouldn't call it counseling, but mentorship to the families to help them manage their limited resources better. So aligning gifts and interests with ministry is important. Identifying congregational members with the greatest resistance, because there's those people that exist in every congregation. It's
not going to work. Place. We'll never do this.
It's not going to work. It'll never work. And really working to change their minds, because they may unconsciously sabotage carefully designed plans. So really being inclusive in the process, even for those who might potentially be resistant to the ideas. And then identifying key leaders who are not necessarily in elected positions. There's church leaders and then there's church leaders. And so, again, and I think that does also play into aligning gifts and interests with ministry. And I think that the next part is, once you gain consensus that, yeah, we do really want to do something, but what is it that we want to do? And then you need to analyze the community assets. And asset-based community development considers local assets as the building blocks to create sustainable community development. So really, in every community, no matter how devastated it is, there are assets in the communities, even if it's just the people that live there. They're assets. And why are assets important? So when you hear the term, we think about, financial or houses or cars. But in community development, there are 7 distinct assets that make up a community profile. And they are financial and there are political, there are human resources and assets, cultural, built infrastructure. You may have great curbs and sidewalks, but that's it. That's usually not the case. I made that up. But, natural environmental and social. But by discovering these strengths, community members, it's important to really start off with the asset and working from that strength. Work from the strengths and not the weaknesses of a community. And when you do that, you develop a renewed sense of pride in the community. You grow more confident, people grow more confident in their own abilities and are willing to invest themselves and their resources into capacity building for the community. So when you're analyzing community needs, it's really, really important to get out of the sanctuary. That's key. So a lot of times I'll say, I'll get a call from a congregation and they'll say, yeah, we want to buy up 7 houses. They're vacant and abandoned. And yep, that's what we want to do because that'll improve the community. And then I will say, well, what did the community say? And they'll say, well, we're sure that's it. Like, no, okay, so we have to work from inside the community and not do to a community what we think is best. And we have to walk alongside of that community because if that's not the beginning place, then you will meet resistance more than likely. So we work with the congregations or a social ministry to really walk through this process if it seems overwhelming and daunting. And a lot of times we work through the process, what we call gospel seeds. Reverend Carlos Hernandez is kind of the creator of that. And for years, he was with the Office of National Missions in the Hispanic ministry. But we still utilize him in his services. So we could potentially host the gospel seeds in the community, but it all of what he does is kind of outlined here. Map out a 5 to 7 block radius, survey homes, business and agencies in the community. So we schedule interviews with several agencies that are already providing services within those communities to learn, what is it that you have determined that are unmet needs by the work that you've been doing with the people in this community. And then businesses as well, also other stakeholders. It could be political representatives, other congregations, and then the next day we survey homes. We're actually going out, knocking on doors and talking to people saying, hey, we're the church or the organization from down the way. And we're really just here to listen. We really want to learn what is your greatest unmet need and how might we be able to serve you. Interesting enough, we don't lead with the gospel. We just lead with the questions about really just want to know what your greatest unmet needs. And if the door opens to share if the door opens for any opportunity to share the gospel, then we will. But that's not kind of the point of the conversation.
But you would be surprised how easy it is to get people to open up and talk about what the needs are in the community. We were down in Houston doing gospel seeds, and we actually filled a void that really the city should have been doing. The people a lot of them felt neglected, and they were happy to see that someone cared, and we happened to have some funding to assist them with some home repairs. And they were just elated that this type of assistance was coming to them. And so, but I was really amazed to just see how willing people were to open themselves up and invite you into their homes and let you take a look around, you know. In that particular case, we were looking at flood damage. And so it's really a beautiful process when you get out and you go door to door and talk to those residents. And you don't have to go far out in your neighborhood, just a few blocks at a time.
Yes. So through that process, then you identify the most critical needs and most valuable assets to the community. Because as you come back and gather between the information that you receive from the stakeholders, interviewing businesses and agencies and other individuals and the people, the residents in the community, there will be recurring themes. And at that point, you just kind of determine, okay, these are the top 5. And then how is it that we as a church can address those, and who can we partner with? And then that becomes the beginning of the process. But as you're out and you're surveying, it's important to gather that contact information after the survey is completed, because, you know, those are potential prospects for ministry later on, not only for ministry, but also prospects for you to be able to serve those families in need. Because it's all about, I'm sorry.
And they volunteer as well.
Yes, because it's all about serving body and soul. That's kind of the point of the work. And you can start off as something as small as hosting a forum at your church too. So there's a combination of things that you can do to assess the community needs, and then the goal is to just get out, move into action. So at this point, if you're interested, this is how we could help as a corporation. And I alluded to this a little bit earlier. We deliver consulting and technical assistance. And it is very customized in terms of what you need. And it's very community-based. So again, we would not entertain a conversation about, we know what the community wants. It has to be the other way around. We need to analyze what the community actually wants. And we need to assess, collect as a partner what those community needs are. And we provide local project development, assessment, feasibility of it, help you project plan, and then ultimately implement the project, which includes helping to identify resources, financial partners, and otherwise. We do have an application. The application doesn't cost, but the application kind of walks you through the process to kind of help you think through some questions about what it is that you really would like to do. And again, helping identify and secure funding. So thank you for listening to us. I know it was a bit verbose, and a lot of this work and conversation is a bit technical, but that's kind of the nature of the work, but it is fun.
Yes, it is. It really is. It really is.
And it's always a pleasure to work with you guys. Thank you so much for kind of giving us your expertise, most especially giving us how to access these resources and how to work with you. So very excited about that. So for all of our viewers that are with us, we'll have an opportunity now to do a little Q&A. So go down to your Q&A box and type in questions that you do have. In the meantime, I'll just point out, since we've worked together pretty closely over the years, very happy to hear again, the connection between, yes, you do a lot of affordable housing, but ultimately this is about people's eternal dwelling places. There's something different about Lutheran housing support versus other agencies that we have to offer. Another thing I thought was important that you noted is the asset-based approach. I think any congregation or agency can just feel completely overwhelmed in their circumstances in the inner city at times. And that's because they look at it from what they see as being lacking. They see it as what is the need. They see the individuals maybe even as this is the problem that I have to solve. But when you flip that on its head and you turn it into what are the assets, and we see every person as being created in the image of God, that have capacity to be a part of making a change and difference, I think that sets things in the right tone. And I think that's much more appropriate. I think it also allows us to give people their human dignity, and to see in themselves that they are truly one of God's own. So the last part that I was going to lead up to with that, though, is that even though we get to that place where, okay, we get it, mercy connected to word and sacrament ministry, we get it, that this is asset map. We don't have to be completely overwhelmed by it all, but there's still going to be reservations about, I don't want to be a landlord. And I don't, if it's about housing, and I don't want to be a business owner if it's about a social enterprise. Talk just a little bit more about how do you get past that obstacle?
So
Go ahead.
I was going to say, if you don't want to be a landlord, and that's where I wouldn't encourage a congregation to be a landlord, because if you're ministering to those families, it's difficult to try to minister and then also collect rent, especially if they become delinquent. Then that creates a very contentious situation. So I would encourage, that's where, partnering with those that do that well. For instance, in Detroit, there's a Lutheran Social Service Agency. I think it's an RSO. And they actually provide property management services. So we've been encouraging the pastor, because he has several rentals, to partner with that agency to provide that support and that service to him, so that he can continue to be the family's minister and minister to them. So I would always encourage you to stay in your lane, capitalize on your strengths, and find partners to do the other, and partners that are missionally aligned. I always say that. And then that takes a little bit of work to find those that are missionally aligned.
But I think that's what's always been the benefit of having a Lutheran housing support, is that you do stay in your lane. You focus on your word and sacrament ministry. You see the needs of your community. You care about the needs of your community, but you have the right partnerships and collaboration. And what Lutheran housing support does very well is to bring those partners to bear to work together, which brings us to our next question. And this comes from Patricia, and she's asking for maybe a specific example. I think at the individual level, maybe family, small group, but and somebody that's benefited from the work of housing support. Can you tell us a story, an impact story of a person?
I have one that's actually a family in Detroit. A couple of years ago, we have a pastor up there that we worked with for a long time. We actually did a loan with him, and then he went on to acquire several other buildings right behind his church and to develop them into transitional housing. Well, he had one house that he just never could get the funding to complete. And so we worked with him and actually put together a strategy to get volunteer laborers and skilled tradesmen to actually do the work. He was able to secure the materials, and then the volunteers were able to complete the work. Now,
Can I interject to say that those volunteers, the majority of those volunteers came from other suburban congregations. So while we didn't list that, but those are, key partnerships as well as other LCMS congregations.
Absolutely. And we only used two professional level companies to help rehab the house. And so this particular house, the family that came into it was a single mother with 6 children, and that's a lot. But I talked back to the pastor and asked how things were going. with he and the family. He said, well, the mom was still having her struggles, but he told me something, and it just let me know that we're doing the right thing. He said that he had baptized all 6 of those children. And that's really what this is all about. At the end of the day, it's leading people to Christ, and also being a humanitarian and trying to make someone's life better. And so that's one of my favorite examples about some folks that we've helped.
Well chosen. That's exactly what we wanted to hear, was how do we connect God's mercy ultimately to the mercy that we know in terms of salvation. So thank you. And Patricia says thank you. Next question up is from Victor. Again, he says, well done on your presentation. Thanks. But the question, does the current federal administration have any new grants available for housing support?
No.
No. Unfortunately, matter of fact, most of the affordable housing programs are under attack each time a new budget has been submitted. And then it's beaten back by bipartisan support. And then the funding is put back in. But that's kind of like a little deja vu all over again effect, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Any other questions? Hop on to the Q&A button down at the bottom bar on your screen.
We couldn't be that thorough. We have, what, 15 minutes left? Come on, you guys.
We have 3 minutes left, I think.
2 minutes left. I know if I could give you guys all day, it'd be awesome.
No, we could do another hour on this. This was just an introduction to community.
We could talk about our partnerships that we've done in different places, and we could go on and on. But very, very thorough, very good understanding of how to get involved. Okay, we got another question.
Oh, good.
So what's the longest running project to date that's been completed? Would that be Nehemiah?
Actually, I would say Nehemiah, in terms of the church, where the church body was initially engaged. And then I would say secondly would be the St. Peter Zion project in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which started back in, I'm thinking, the 1990s, mid-1990s.
Yeah, right. And
that's back even when President Harrison was a parish pastor.
Right.
So that goes back a long ways. And that was really
completed.
Pardon me?
It's hard to say completed, though. It's been in stages, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been in stages. Right now, Lutheran Housing Support is a development consultant with St. Peter Zion Project, which is the nonprofit. It's a partnership between Zion Lutheran Church and St. Peter's Catholic Church. And we're in the process of developing 48 units of senior housing and hopefully a grocery store. But if we can't procure a grocery store and an owner, it will be a space that can be parceled out to provide other services to the community. But it's an ongoing project, but it has had several phases, and the several phases have been successfully completed of both residential development, owner-occupied rehab, lots of infrastructure improvements, curbs, streets, sidewalks, lighting, a new urban league, library, Head Start.
And how about the Nehemiah project? How has that legacy kind of impacted the congregation?
Oh, wow. So I don't even know the dollar amount, because it's been leveraged so many times over and over and over. But I know we're up to almost 6,000 units. There's lots of commercial development. Once burnt out community, it's now flourishing. And Pastor Binky is still there in the middle of it, ministering to the families in the neighborhood and in the adjacent neighborhoods. So it has been an incredibly successful. And I would say that that $1 million has leveraged billions of dollars of investment. Yes.
Right. And I think And I think that's the point too, is it's legacy. It's kind of left its legacy in the community for years to come. Okay, last question I think will come from Victor again. Millennials enjoy having hands-on work, and I agree. You can do all sorts of like things to try to do a separate mission just to millennials, but to me, the most I see of millennials being involved is the hands-on work. That's what they're for, and they want to be a part of that, and part of the bigger body of Christ. So can housing support, this is the question, can housing support be a vehicle to engage younger generations?
Absolutely. So I have a great story about that too. So one of our congregations where we partner with, and so we talk about owner-occupied rehab again, because that's one of our national key initiatives. It's called Helping Hand Initiative. But one of the partnerships with Helping Hand Initiative, the congregation actually had a youth group, and the congregation actually has a flourishing school. And the youth group decided, the youth pastor decided that he didn't want to go to Kenya. He didn't want to go to wherever they go on a regular, but they wanted to deploy their kids on a mission trip to work in the city, because this is actually a more suburban congregation. So they wanted to deploy their kids to work in mission in the inner city on this owner-occupied initiative. And so they did their whole mission trip for about 5 or 6 homes, where they helped with small repairs and painting. And then they hosted a community event at the end of their mission trip. And it was super well attended. And those kids were extremely excited. And they had a newfound love for community. Really didn't know the neighborhood, really didn't know the people, had never interacted with the people in the community, and just had a new sense of what that meant. And asked could they do it again. So that is going to become something that they do regularly, not every year, but more regularly.
Well, good. Yeah. I think, it's very true that they're looking for kind of that. They talk about authenticity a lot. They want to see the church genuinely care about their neighbor, and they are looking for those opportunities to see the church in action, to be the body of Christ. So very good example. I think that's about time. That'll probably wrap it up. So on behalf of all of LCMS City Mission Land out there, I will give an applause to you guys. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for giving us your contact information. If anybody's got more questions or conversation or looking for some assist, these are the folks that can do it. So again, thank you so much. Be sure to tune in again next month, same bat time, same bat channel. Let people know that our next topic again is going to be tackling some social issues that includes racism, disability, aging, family dysfunction, human trafficking, life issues, immigration, all those things that you find in the big city. So we're looking forward to another conversation. But again, thank you, Nicole, for being with us.
Thank you for inviting us again.
Thank you, Fred, for being with us today.
I appreciate it.
All right. God bless.
God bless.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.